The second week of November, in the Long Gallery at Rackham, the old Duke of Rackham asked for his tea at 4 o'clock, and was given it at 4 o'clock. And Hester Callow watched the cup go from one pair of hands to another and understood, with a clarity that arrived in her stomach before it arrived anywhere useful, that she had just seen something she was not meant to see. It was nothing. That was the difficulty. Lady Ardis Vane, who had been the Duke's wife for 6 years and was 31 years old, had carried the cup from the side table to the wing chair and set it at his elbow, and there was not a person in the gallery who would have called that anything but a wife's kindness. The Duke had thanked her. He had drunk half of it. He had put his hand flat on the arm of the chair the way a man does when the room has begun to move without permission. And he had made a small sound in his throat, and Lady Ardis had said, in a voice pitched for the whole gallery to hear, that his Grace was tired, that his Grace had been tired since September, that the household really must stop asking so much of him. Hester stood at the far end of the gallery with a jug of hot water she had been sent to fetch, and had not been asked to bring anywhere in particular. She was the companion. That was the word the house used for her, when it used a word at all. 4 months in the service of a dying man's household, and the label had settled over her within the first fortnight, and it had not been unkind, exactly. It had simply been final. The companion may take the tray, Lady Ardis said without turning her head. The companion has nothing else to do. The words went into Hester's ear and stayed there. She crossed the gallery. She took the tray. The cup on it was still half full, and the tea in it was cold enough to have gone slightly opaque at the surface, and there was a faint sediment at the bottom that could have been leaf and could have been anything, and Hester looked at it for the length of one breath and then carried it out. She would think afterward that the whole of it turned on that one breath, not on courage, on the small, stupid, unglamorous fact that she had looked when nobody had told her to. At the door she nearly walked into a man she did not know. He was tall, and he had come in from the courtyard, and there was rain still on the shoulders of his coat, and he did not step aside for her the way a gentleman steps aside for a servant, which was to say quickly and without seeing. He stopped. He looked at the tray. He looked at the cup on the tray. And then he looked at her face for one moment longer than the situation required, and something in his own face closed like a door being shut against weather. "Leave it," he said. "Set it down." She set it down on the console by the door, because his voice did not permit any other answer, and he did not touch the cup, and he did not explain, and he walked past her into the gallery, and she heard Lady Ardis say "Julian" in a tone of perfect warmth, and she heard him say nothing at all. That was the whole of their first meeting. A tray. 2 words. A silence where an answer should have been. Julian Vane, Marquess of Ellerby, had not been at Rackham in 3 years. Hester learned that within the hour from the housekeeper, Mrs. Pember, who had been at Rackham 41 years, and who delivered the fact while folding linen, and did not look up while she delivered it. 3 years, Mrs. Pember said. Since the wedding. He came for the wedding. He did not stay for the breakfast. He quarreled with his father. He quarreled with nobody. Mrs. Pember shook out a sheet. That is rather the trouble with him. He does not quarrel. He simply goes. Hester had been at Rackham since July, and in that time she had learned the shape of the house the way one learns a language by being shouted at in it. She was 24 years old. She was the daughter of a Devon apothecary who had died in March, leaving £11 and a debt of 60, and the 60 had been settled by her uncle on the condition that she make herself useful somewhere, far away. And Rackham had wanted a companion for a duke who was, they said, in his last decline. She had come expecting to read. She had read a great deal. She had also learned the duke's face very well, which was a thing nobody had asked her to do, and which was, it turned out, the only qualification that would matter. Because the duke's decline did not have the shape of a decline. Her father had kept a shop for 30 years, and had let her keep the ledgers from the age of 12, and a great deal of what she knew, she had learned the way anyone learns a trade, which is by copying out other people's numbers until the numbers begin to speak. She knew what a man looked like when his heart was failing. She knew what a man looked like when his lungs were going. She knew, too, what it looked like when a thing came and came again slightly worse, and went again, and came back once more, and each time left a little less of the man behind it. The Duke of Rackham was 72. In July he had walked to the Ha-Ha and back. In August he had walked to the Rose Arbor and back. In September he had begun to be unwell on Tuesdays. Tuesdays. That was the detail she could not put down. He was ill on Tuesdays and Fridays, and he was better on Sundays. And there was no illness in her father's ledgers, or in any book she had read that kept a calendar. She said nothing. There was no one to say it to. She was the companion, and a companion who begins to speak about the Duchess is a companion who is gone by Michaelmas, with no character and no destination, and she had 11 pounds in the world, which was to say she had nothing. So she wrote it down instead. She kept a small book, the kind her father had used for stock, bound in green cloth and soft at the corners from being carried, and every evening after the Duke was settled, she sat in the window seat of her room at the top of the east stair, and wrote what she had seen, the hour of his tea, whether he had finished it, who had carried it, whether he had been well the following morning. She did not write conclusions. She did not permit herself conclusions. She wrote the way her father had taught her to write, which was to put down the thing, and not the meaning of the thing, because the meaning would arrive on its own if the thing were recorded honestly enough. By the second week of November there were 4 months in the Green Book, and the 4 months had a shape, and the shape had a name she would not write down. The Marquess stayed. Nobody had expected that, least of all Hester thought. The Marquess, he had come for a week. He remained for a second. He took the smaller of the 2 studies and did not use it. He rode out at 7, and returned at 9, and appeared at his father's chair at 10. And he sat with the old man for an hour every morning and said almost nothing, and the Duke, who could no longer follow a long sentence, seemed to rest better for having him there. He also watched the tea. Hester noticed it because she was watching the tea, and one is quick to recognize one's own habit in another. He never spoke of it. He simply arranged, in 100 small, deniable ways, to be in the room at 4 o'clock. He would arrive with a question about the drainage in the North Field. He would arrive with a letter that needed his father's opinion, and could have waited a fortnight. He would arrive with nothing at all, and stand at the window with his hands behind his back and look at the park until the cup had been drunk. "He hovers," Lady Artis said one afternoon in the morning room, to her cousin, and Hester was 3 feet away, arranging the fire irons, and was therefore not present. "He hovers and he says nothing, and he looks at me as though I have taken something of his. My dear, I have taken nothing. I have given 6 years to that chair." Her cousin, Miss Cordelia Ashe, who was 22 and had been brought to Rackham in October, and had been placed at every dinner on the Marquess's right hand, said something soothing, and the companion, Lady Artis said. "Have you noticed?" she writes. Hester's hand did not stop on the fire iron. That was the whole of her achievement in that moment, and she was proud of it for years afterward. Her hand did not stop. She writes what? Letters, I imagine. To some cousin in Devon, a small laugh entirely without malice, which was somehow worse than malice. What else has the companion to write about? The weather and the wallpaper. The fire irons went into their stand. Hester stood and curtsied to a room that did not look at her, and left. Her heart was going hard enough that she could hear it in her throat, and she went up the east stair, 2 at a time, and put her hand on the Green Book where it lay under the mattress, and it was where she had left it, and it had not been touched, and she sat on the floor beside the bed and breathed until the breathing was ordinary again. Then she got up and moved the book. She put it in the still room, in the 3rd jar from the left, on the high shelf, which held a dried lemon balm that nobody had touched since the old Duchess died, and she wedged it down under the leaves, and put the lid back on, and went down to dinner. The Marquess sat at the head of the table because his father could no longer come down. Miss Ashe sat at his right hand in ice blue silk and made 3 remarks about the hunting, and 1 about the weather. Lady Artis sat at the foot in half-mourning she had put on 9 months early, which was a thing Hester had noticed in September and had written in the Green Book, without comment. Hester sat where companions sit, which is near the door. She did not expect to be spoken to. She was not. She watched the Marquess refuse the wine and take water, and she watched him answer Miss Ashe in sentences of 4 words, and she watched him once look down the length of the table at the empty chair where his father should have been, and for one moment something crossed his face that had nothing of stone in it at all. Then it was gone, and he asked Miss Ashe whether the roads had been very bad, and Miss Ashe said that they had. It rained for 6 days. On the 4th, Hester found the Marquess in the still room. She stopped in the doorway. He was standing at the shelf with his back to her, and he had a jar in his hands. And it was not the third from the left. And her heart went very quiet in a way that was worse than pounding. "My lord," he turned. He put the jar back on the shelf without hurrying. "Miss Callow, I did not know you were here." "No." He looked at her. He had gray eyes and a face that gave up nothing, and there was a fine white line through his right eyebrow that she had noticed the first day and had never once seen him touch. "You keep the still room. I keep it tidy. It is not used." It was used. He turned back to the shelf. "My mother used it. She made a cordial for coughs that tasted of nothing and worked better than anything the physician sold. I could not tell you what was in it. I was 9. It was, she realized later, the largest number of consecutive words he had spoken in her hearing. At the time, she only stood in the doorway with her hands full of linen, and did not know what to do with them. "My father kept a shop," she said. "An apothecary's in Devon. He went still. It was a small stillness, and she would not have caught it if she had not been watching his hands." "Did he?" "He died in March." "I am sorry," the Marquess said. And then, after a moment, "What did he teach you?" She should have said nothing. She had told herself for 4 months to say nothing, and the whole architecture of her safety was built on saying nothing, and she stood in the doorway of a cold, still room, in a house where she owned nothing, and she heard herself say, "To write down what I see before I decide what it means." The rain went on against the window. "Come inside," he said. "You are standing in the draught." She came inside. He did not look at her while she did it. He put his hand on the shelf, on the wood, not on any jar, and he said, in a voice level enough to be about the weather, "My father is ill on Tuesdays." Hester's breath went out of her. "And Fridays?" she said. "Yes." They stood in the cold, still room with 3 feet of stone floor between them, and neither of them said the next thing, because the next thing had a name, and neither of them was prepared to be the one who spoke it aloud in a house that belonged to somebody else. "Do not," the Marquess said at last, "write it in anything that stays under a mattress." She felt the blood go out of her face. "Mrs. Pember," he said, "has been in this house 41 years. And she does not like the new arrangements, and she talks to me because I am the only one who asks. That is all. Nobody is watching you." He paused. "That is not true. I am watching you. Nobody else is." And then, because he was who he was, he ruined it entirely by saying, "Eat something. You have got thinner since I came." He left. She stood in the still room for a long moment with her hands full of linen, and her face hot in a cold room, and the part of her that had kept a ledger for 12 years wrote down quite calmly that her pulse had gone to 100, and that there was no medical reason for it whatsoever. If you have ever known a thing before you could prove it, and had to go on setting the table anyway, you will know exactly the room she was standing in. She did not go to him with the book. That was the thing she was proudest of later, and the thing that nearly cost her everything. She went to the physician instead. Dr. Marrow came on the 3rd Tuesday of November, as he had come every 3rd Tuesday since September, and he sat with the Duke for 20 minutes and came out and said what he always said, which was that his Grace was failing gently and that there was nothing to be done, and that Lady Artis was to be commended for her devotion. Hester caught him in the passage. She had her father's ledger in her head, and none of it in her hands. "Dr. Marrow, might I ask you something about His Grace's medicine?" He was not unkind. He was busy, and he was 60. And he had been coming to Rackham for 30 years. And he looked at her the way one looks at furniture that is spoken. "His Grace's medicine is compounded by Lady Artis herself," he said. "She has been most attentive. Most attentive. A great many wives would have left it to the servants. Yes, I only wondered whether the doses were kept a record of. My dear young woman," he was smiling. That was the part she remembered. He was smiling, and he meant nothing at all by it. "You are the companion. Read to him. It comforts him." He went out to his carriage. She stood in the passage, with her hands at her sides. That night she wrote 3 lines in the green book and put it back in the lemon balm, and she lay awake and understood that she had just been told very politely that no door in England opened to a woman with £11 and an accusation. The house filled for Christmas. It was Lady Artis's doing, and it was done beautifully. 26 for dinner, on the 23rd, and a ball on the 24th, in the long gallery, and the gallery had not been opened for a ball in 11 years, and the sconces were rehung, and the floor was chalked, and the orchestra came from Bath. The Duke was to be brought down. That was the announcement. His Grace would come down for 1 hour, in his chair, to see his house alive again before he left it. Lady Artis said it in the morning room with tears standing in her eyes. And they were real tears, and Hester watched them, and thought that this was the thing nobody ever tells you about people like Lady Artis. She believed it. She believed she was giving a dying man a gift. She had a story about herself, and the story was tender. And the story had 6 years of her life in it. And the fact that she had been putting something in the tea since September lived in some room of her mind that the story never entered. The dowager's arrangements went forward. So did the other arrangement. Miss Ashe was to be engaged to the Marquess. It was announced to nobody, and understood by everyone. Lady Artis had brought her cousin from Kent for precisely this, and the logic was flawless. The Marquess would inherit. The Marquess would need a wife. The Marquess's wife would be a vain cousin, and Lady Artis, who would otherwise be a dowager with a jointure and no house. The order would hold. It had held for 400 years. It would go on holding. Hester saw the whole of it laid out over 3 days of hanging greenery, and she saw one other thing, which was that the Marquess had understood it the day he arrived and had said nothing, and had let them all go on arranging, and had watched the tea. He came to her once in that week. She was in the gallery counting chairs. Miss Callow, my lord on the 24th. He was looking at the chalked floor and not at her. My father comes down at 9. He will be given something at 10:30. Wine, or a cordial, or something warm, because the gallery is cold. A pause. I will be at the terrace door. Do not carry anything to him. Do not touch anything that is carried to him. Whatever you see, do not put your hand near it. My lord, if you know what she is doing, why do you not simply say it? He turned his head then, and looked at her, and for the first time she saw the thing under the stone all the way through, and it was not coldness, it was fear. Because I said it once before, he said. The gallery was very quiet. Somewhere below a footman dropped something and swore and was hushed. 3 years ago, he said. At my father's wedding breakfast I told him that I did not trust her. I had no evidence. I had a feeling, and I had my mother 9 months in the ground, and I told him in front of 40 people that he was being made a fool of. He said it evenly. The way a man reads out a bill. He asked me to leave his house. I left it. I did not come back for 3 years, and in 3 years he wrote to me 11 times, and I answered none of them because I was proud, and because being right had cost me nothing. Yet he stopped. He put his hand out and touched the back of a chair. Once, and took it away. He is 72, and he cannot follow a sentence to the end of it. That is what my feeling was worth. I will not go into that gallery with a feeling again. If I accuse her without proof, she will have me put out of this house by Boxing Day, and there will be no one left in it who is looking. And she will finish him by Lent, and she will be sorry when she does it, and he will be just as dead. Hester stood with her hands full of nothing. Then what do you want? she said. I want a record, the Marquess said, kept by someone with no reason to lie and nothing to gain. 4 months of it. Hours. Days. Who carried what? He looked at her. You were the only person in England who has one. She had known it since the still room. Hearing it aloud was a different animal. If I give it to you, she said, and she learns of it, I am put out of this house, without a character, and I do not eat. Yes, you will not tell me that you would prevent it. No, he said, I would not lie to you. And then, low and slowly, and as though the word cost him something to lift, Hester. It was the first time. She had been at Rackham 5 months, and she had been called the companion perhaps 200 times, and no one in 5 months had said her name. She felt it go through her like heat through cold glass, and she looked at the chalked floor, and she could not look up, and she despised herself for the wanting, because the wanting was so obviously the least useful thing in the room. She wanted him to say it again. That was the entire content of her mind, in the middle of everything. And she could not make it stop on the 24th, she said, to the floor. At the terrace door I will bring it. He did not touch her. She understood, from the way his hand rested on the back of the chair, and did not move, exactly how deliberate the not touching was, and that understanding was the most improper thing that had happened to her in her life. He said, "Thank you," and went out. On the morning of the 24th, the green book was gone. She stood in the still room with the lid of the jar in her hand and the lemon balm turned out on the counter and her fingers going through it again, and it was not there, and the jar had been put back with its label facing the wall, and she had never once in 5 months put a jar back with its label facing the wall. Mrs. Pember found her sitting on the still room floor 20 minutes later. "Girl, get up. It is gone." "I know what is gone." Mrs. Pember shut the door behind her. 41 years in the house, and she had never once shut a door in Hester's presence. Her ladyship's woman went through the east stair rooms on Tuesday and found nothing, and on Wednesday she asked me, very pleasantly, what the companion did in the still room. I said the companion tidied it. "She has had 2 days. Then it is in the fire." "It is not in the fire." Mrs. Pember said it flatly. "There has been no fire in her ladyship's room since Tuesday. I lay the fires. I would know." Hester looked up. "She has not burnt it." Pember said because she has read it, and she has understood that it is worth more entire. A book of a servant's scribbles produced at the right moment is a mad girl's fancy. Burnt, it is nothing at all. She will keep it until she needs it, and she will need it tonight, because tonight her ladyship's cousin is to be engaged. And the only person in this house who has ever looked at her sideways is standing at the terrace door. That was the moment the floor went out from under her. Not the theft. The arithmetic. She had spent 4 months writing the truth down in a green book, because writing it down was the only thing she could do, and the writing down had been her whole courage, and now the book was in the hands of the woman it accused, and it was not evidence any longer. It was a weapon. It had her hand in it, and her name in it, and 4 months of a servant's private obsession with her mistress's tea, and read aloud by the right voice in the right room. It was not a record at all. It was proof that the companion was unwell. It was proof that the companion had been watching the Duchess for 120 nights. It was every reason in the world to put her out of the house before the pudding. And the Marquess would be standing at the terrace door at 10:30, waiting for it, and he would have nothing. And he had already told her exactly what he would do, with nothing. She sat on the still room floor with lemon balm all over her skirt. "Get up," said Mrs. Pember, more gently. "You have 8 hours. Hester got up. What she did with the 8 hours was not brave, she would say. So, afterward, to anyone who tried to make it into something. She did not confront anyone. She did not steal anything back. She went to the kitchen and she asked Mrs. Baxi. Pember 1 question, and then she asked the cook 2 more, and then she sat down at the scrub table with a sheet of paper and did the only thing she had ever been trained to do, which was to copy out other people's numbers until the numbers began to speak. The Green Book was gone. The Green Book had never been the evidence. The evidence was that the Duke had been ill on Tuesdays and Fridays for 11 weeks, and she was not the only person at Rackham who wrote things down. Cook kept a book. Cook had kept a book for 19 years, because cooks are answerable for every ounce that leaves the larder, and in Cook's book was every tray that had gone up to the Duke's room since Lady Ardis had taken his medicine into her own hands in September, and each tray had a date, and each tray had a hand that carried it. And Cook wrote it down, not because she suspected anything, but because she had been robbed of a ham in 1809, and had never trusted anyone since. The still room had a book, too. Deliveries. Every parcel from the apothecary in Marlbury signed for at the door, and Mrs. Pember laid the fires, and Mrs. Pember knew which rooms had burned coal on which nights. And Mrs. Pember had 41 years of knowing exactly who was where. None of it was an accusation. That was the whole of it. Not one line in any of those books said a word against her ladyship. They were laundry and larder and coal. They were the most boring documents in England. Laid beside one another, they said that on 11 Tuesdays and 11 Fridays, a parcel from Marlbury had been signed for at the door in the morning, and a tray had gone up from the kitchen at 4 in her ladyship's own hand, and that on no other day of the week had both those things happened, and that on no Sunday, not once in 11 weeks, had either. Hester copied it out onto one sheet of paper in a hand her father had drilled into her, and it took her 4 hours. And Cook stood over her shoulder for the last of it, and said nothing at all for a long while, and then went and sat down. At 9 o'clock, the Duke of Rackham came down to the long gallery. They had put him in the wing chair by the second window, and the orchestra played something old and slow, and 140 candles burned in the sconces that had not been lit in 11 years. And the old man sat with a rug over his knees, and his hands loose in his lap, and looked at his own house with an expression that Hester could not read and did not try to. Lady Ardis stood at his shoulder in half mourning and grey pearls, and was magnificent. There was no other word. She received the county for an hour, with one hand resting on the back of her husband's chair, and every person who came through the door saw a woman who had given her youth to a dying man, and every person was right, and every person was wrong. Miss Ashe was in ice blue at the end of the room. By the terrace door the Marquess stood at that door, and did not go to her. At 20 minutes past 10, Lady Ardis turned to the room, and said that his Grace would take a little wine before he was carried up, and would the company drink to him. And there was a soft murmur of the kind that gathers in a room when a thing is understood to be a farewell. A footman came with a tray. On the tray were 2 glasses, and Lady Ardis took one of them, and put it into her husband's hand, and closed his fingers around it because he could not close them himself. "To his Grace," she said. And Hester walked into the middle of the long gallery. She did not raise her voice. That was the thing the county talked about for a year afterward. The companion did not raise her voice. She was 24 years old in a grey wool gown among 200 candles, and she walked to the wing chair and stopped 4 feet from it, and she said, "Your Grace, I beg you will not drink that." The orchestra did not stop, because orchestras never do. It played 9 more bars into a silence that had gone absolutely solid, and then it stopped, and the last note sat in the air. Lady Ardis did not move her hand from the back of the chair. "Ah," she said, "the companion." She said it to the room, not to Hester, and it was perfect, and Hester felt the room turn. She felt 200 people decide, all at once and without malice, that a servant had lost her senses at a party. It was the 3rd time in 5 months she had heard the word in that mouth, and it was the first time it had ever been meant to kill. "Forgive us," Lady Ardis said to the county. "She has been unwell. She has been writing." And she put her hand, without hurrying at all, into the reticule at her wrist, and brought out a small green book, soft at the corners, and held it up so the candlelight found it. For 4 months, it seems. About me she had it. She opened it. She had marked a page. And Hester, who had been thinking about this moment for 11 hours, said the sentence she had built in the kitchen. "Yes, my lady," she said. It is mine. Every word in it is in my hand, and I will not be able to prove one line of it, and I do not ask anyone here to believe it. Cook's book is not in my hand. Mrs. Pember's is not in my hand. The still room's delivery book is not in my hand. Dr. Marrow, you signed the parcels from Marlbury at the door yourself, on 11 Tuesdays. They are all 4 of them on the table behind you. I have touched nothing but the copying. Nobody looked at Hester. 200 people, all at once, looked at the table behind Dr. Marrow. Dr. Marrow, who had been coming to Rackham for 30 years, and who had told the companion in a passage in November to go and read to the old man because it comforted him, walked to the table and picked up the top sheet and put his spectacles on. And the room watched a 60-year-old physician read 4 hours of a girl's handwriting. In a silence you could have stood a spoon in, he read it twice. He did not say anything clever. He said Tuesdays, in a voice that had gone wrong in the middle, and then he sat down on a chair that was not meant for sitting on, and he took his spectacles off, and he put his hand over his mouth. Lady Ardis's hand came off the back of the chair. It was the only thing she did. The green book was still open in her other hand, and her lips moved, and what came out was, "It is the companion." And then, again quieter, "It is only the companion." And there was nobody in that gallery who did not hear the ground go out from under the sentence the 3rd time she tried it. The Marquess crossed the room. He did not hurry. He came the whole length of the long gallery through a crowd that opened for him without being asked, and the candles went along the line of his shoulder as he came. And he did not look at Lady Ardis, and he did not look at Miss Ashe, and he did not look at the county. He stopped in front of his father's chair, and he took the glass out of the old man's fingers, gently, and set it down on the tray. Then he turned and stood beside her, and faced the room. "Miss Callow is my affianced wife," he said. The silence after it did not break. It settled. Somewhere at the back a woman said, "Oh," very quietly, and put her hand up to her mouth, and near the terrace door, Miss Ashe looked at the 2 of them for a long moment, and then, before anyone had told her to, took 1 step backward out of the light, and understood, in that step, that she had been the correct choice for something that had never been a courtship at all. Dr. Marrow stood up. He was not steady. "My lord," he said, "I will want the parcels themselves. And I must ask that her ladyship remain in the house until the magistrate can be sent for in the morning." "She will remain," the Marquess said. "She will have her own rooms and her own woman, and every civility this house has. She will not go near my father again." He said nothing else. He had said fewer than 30 words in the whole of it. He did not name what she had done, and he did not have to, because there were 4 books on a table and a physician holding his spectacles and 200 people in a candlelit gallery who had all just done the same arithmetic at the same moment, and the county's verdict does not require a speech. It requires a fact and a silence. They carried the old Duke up at 11. He had followed almost none of it. At the door of the gallery, he put his hand out and caught his son's sleeve, and held it, and did not let go for a long moment, and said Julian, which was the only word he said that night, and it was enough to undo a man who had not been undone in 3 years. The Duke of Rackham lived until the middle of March. They were not good months, and they were not bad ones. He did not recover, because there was nothing left to recover. The thing had been done slowly, and slowly is not undone. He was better than he had been since August. He knew the room. He knew his son. Twice he asked for the gallery and was carried down and sat in the second window in the afternoon light. And once in February, he laughed at something, and nobody afterward could remember what. Hester read to him every evening. She was not the companion any longer, and the word had gone out of the house so completely that a new maid asked her, in January, who the companion had been, and Hester could not think of an answer. Lady Ardis Vane left Rackham on the 6th of January, in a closed carriage, for a house in Kent that belonged to her late husband's estate, and would revert to it upon her death. It was arranged quietly. There was no trial. There was, Dr. Marrow explained, a difficulty about proof that would not survive an assize court. And there was an old man in an upstairs room who would not survive one either. and so the thing was done the way such things were done in that county in that year. Entirely, and without a word in any newspaper, and by every family in 3 shires at once. Her cousin went back to Kent within the week, and was married in the spring to a gentleman with a small estate and a large kindness, and did rather better than she would have done at Racombe, and knew it. The Marquess married Hester Callow in the church at Racombe on the 2nd of April, 3 weeks after his father was buried, which was too soon, and the county said so, and the county came anyway. Mrs. Great. Pember stood at the front on the left, in the place where family stands, because the Marquess had put her there himself, and had not consulted anyone about it. They were quiet for a year after that. The house was quiet. It had been a loud house for 6 years, and quiet. Took some getting used to. In November, on an evening when the frost had come early and the gallery was shut for the winter, Hester went into the still room to look for something, and did not find it, and stood for a while, instead among the jars. The green book was on the shelf. It had been returned to her by Dr. Marrow in January in a paper parcel with nothing written on it, and she had put it in the 3rd jar from the left, under the lemon balm, because she had not been able to think where else a thing like that should live. She took it out. The corners were soft. She turned the pages with her thumb the way one does with a book. One has no intention of reading, and the 4 months went past under her hand, the hours and the days and who had carried what, and none of it said a single true thing about what had happened in this house. And all of it was true. She heard him in the doorway before she turned around. She always did now. "You are standing in the draught," her husband said. "I know." He came in. He put his hand on the shelf, on the wood, not on any jar, the way he had the first time, and he looked at the green book in her hands and did not ask her to put it away. "My mother's cordial," he said, "for coughs. I have remembered a little of it. It had honey in it, and something bitter under the honey. She would not tell me what. Angelica," Hester said. "Or gentian. My father used gentian. Perhaps he was quiet a moment. You could make it." "I could try." Outside, past the small window, the frost was coming down white over the park, and the ha-ha and the rose arbor. And somewhere below in the house there was a fire lit and a room warm, and a chair that no one sat in any more, and no one had moved either. She put the book back in the jar and put the lid on and left the label facing out. Thank you for staying to the end of her story. If Hester's quiet stayed with you, I would be glad to know which moment held you.